I'm Taylor. I run a small outpatient clinic I built from a folding table, 3 borrowed chairs, and an obscene amount of late nights. I'm not flashy, just steady. Credentialed, careful with paperwork, obsessive about staff morale, and painfully respectful of other people's time, mine included. The clinic pays my mortgage, my staff's salaries, the loan for the medical equipment that still looks new because I baby it like a bonsai. It's not an inheritance. It's my career. So when my parents, Margaret and Carlos, and my younger sister, Lena, showed up at 9:20 a.m. on a Tuesday with a ring binder and a printed spreadsheet, I smelled ambush. Not literal cologne smoke, but the old pattern. Family arriving with an agenda they think should be mine. I put coffee down, closed my laptop, and let them set their trap in my waiting room like they owned the place. Margaret smiled like a person delivering cookies and a subpoena. Carlos looked proud, as if he'd just read the Constitution and decided to amend it in favor of his daughter. Lena slung the binder down on the reception desk and said, brightly, "We put together a business plan." The binder was impressively formatted. Cover page, mission statement, a spreadsheet with rows of projected revenue that assumed a bizarrely steady influx of patients and 0 overhead increases. It had clips and tabs, like someone had practiced making something official. That's part of the bait. Polish makes nonsense look like policy. "We think Lena should manage the clinic," Margaret announced. "She's great with people. She's organized. She paused for the word that means nothing and is apparently mandatory at family meetings. "Ambitious." Lena beamed. If ambition could be bottled as a perfume, she'd spritz the room. Carlos leaned forward, touching the spreadsheet with one fingertip like it was a sacred object. 25%, he said, as if naming a number could conjure consent. A quarter of profits, for management. And of course, Lena would need the authority to hire and fire. I felt the floor tilt. 25% is not a casual ask. That's not "let's discuss compensation." That's a hostile takeover in fancy paper. My mouth didn't move for a beat because my brain was doing that incredulous thing where it runs the math and the insult at once. 25% of profits, with no experience-based justification, and from a clinic I had mortgaged, sweat-blooded, and run through 3 years of startup purgatory. "Lena doesn't know our billing system," I said slowly, because when you're surprised you don't get angry right away. You get precise. She's never managed staff schedules. She's never negotiated with insurance companies. She helped at the front desk 2 summers ago for 3 weeks. Margaret's smile dimmed like someone lowering the house lights. "You're being defensive, Taylor. We just want to help. This is about family. You're burnt out. You need support." Help, in their translation, meant claiming equity and authority. Family, in their translation, meant entitlement. Lena chimed in with the kind of feigned humility that's actually a demand. "I'll work for free until we show profit. I just want to give back." I kept my voice steady because I'd learned that anger in front of my staff looked like drama, and history screamed at me that drama eats respect. "Giving back is not the same as taking ownership," I said, "and you can't just decide a quarter of whatever this place makes is yours." Carlos looked offended, like I'd accused him of making breakfast badly. "We're not saying we want to own it," he said. "We just want a stake. You should be compensated for what you've done for us." He nodded at Lena, as if this were charitable work they were proposing rather than a paid managerial post with profit sharing. They had prepared, not with legal counsel, not with an understanding of clinical operations, but with faith. The family faith that because we shared blood, material claims could palpably and rightly slide across titles. They expected gratitude for being offered the chance to manage their daughter's livelihood. At 2:10, because my calendar logs trauma now, Lena pointed to a line on the spreadsheet and said, with the serene certainty of someone reading someone else's life plan, "We can increase patient retention by 10% next quarter if I reorganize scheduling. You'll see the profit." That was the funny part, the cruel muscle twitch. Lena had a track record of disappearing on busy days and once double booking an entire afternoon. The idea that she could reorganize scheduling felt like a clown pitching airline safety, but there they were. Binder, spreadsheet, and a demand for 25%. I let them finish their presentation. Partly because I wanted a complete record of their audacity, partly because ambushes teach you something about people you love. They will always try to save you from yourself by taking what you built. When they finally folded the binder closed and looked at me for approval, the waiting room felt smaller, like it had shrunk to fit the size of the question they'd thrown at me. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes. I set my coffee down, made my face polite, and asked one question that was equal parts eyebrow and scalpel. Why do you think that qualifies as a fair share? I let them finish the binders and gloss moment because people feel better when they think they've been heard. Then I stood, walked to my office, and came back with something they hadn't expected. A crisp, stapled copy of the management services agreement I'd signed with Colorado Healthcare Partners 3 months earlier. "You're welcome to read it," I said, setting it between Margaret and Carlos like a placemat. "Start on page 6. They blinked. Lena tried to smile, the smile that says you're going to let this go because family, but her hands betrayed her, fidgeting with the edge of the binder she'd brought. I tapped the paragraph I wanted them to see. The clause was surgical and deliberate. No family members or persons with familial relationships to the founder shall occupy management positions or have operational control without the prior written approval of the board of directors. That's corporate speak for no aunties, no cousins, no people who think blood equals governance. I'd asked my lawyer to make it explicit. I'd asked Colorado Healthcare Partners to sign off because I knew how persuasive family can be when they smell open doors. Silence settled like dust. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. Carlos cleared his throat and looked to Lena, as if she were a lawyer who'd failed to file. Lena's face went white where it had been flushed with triumph an hour ago. "You." "What?" Margaret said finally. "You made this legal? You signed away your own freedom?" "That's one way to put it," I said. "Another way is that I put structure in place so this clinic can't be siphoned into someone's side hustle. This wasn't impulsive. We brought on an MSO because I need the clinic to be run according to standards. Insurance contracts, compliance, HR policies. Those things don't bend because of sentiment." Carlos tried to pivot the conversation to feelings and family loyalty. "But she's your sister." "She's competent in social settings," I interrupted, calm as the ocean when a storm's about to roll in. "Managing a clinical staff and negotiating payer contracts are different. Colorado Healthcare Partners manages the business side so clinicians can focus on care. Their contract protects the practice and, frankly, my license. Allowing family management without oversight is a liability." Lena, small now, said, "We only asked to help. We would have deferred to you. We wouldn't have interfered." "You would have had authority to interfere," I said. "Authority doesn't come with a polite promise." I watched them absorb it, the binder, the clause, my tone. The strategy had been to neutralize the ambush before it became an argument. I'd anticipated the emotional sales pitch, the "will volunteer" performance. I'd not anticipated that the performance would look so much like entitlement. That's why I'd done the work months ago. Board governance, legal language, an external partner who understood the difference between family dinners and fiduciary duty. Margaret's voice dropped to the kind of quiet people use when they're recalculating their next move. "So you're saying no family can manage? Ever?" "I'm saying not without board approval," I replied. "That approval isn't automatic just because someone is related to me. It's earned. There are processes. There are checks. That's how you keep a clinic solvent and a license intact." They left the office with the binder under Lena's arm and a different cadence to their steps, the kind you get when a script has been rewritten without you. I felt the cool, strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. Vindication because I had protected what I built. Exhaustion because protecting it had meant locking the door on the people who thought they had a right to the keys. I sat back down, sipped the now cold coffee, and felt the truth land. Boundaries are a policy and a muscle. I'd just done the paperwork. The work of enforcing it would come next. When they left with their binder, I didn't tuck the management services agreement back in a drawer. I opened a new spreadsheet. I'd been quietly keeping 2 books for 3 years, the official clinic ledger that our accountant saw, and a second, uglier list I kept for myself. Call it the family file. It started as notes. Dates a family member had an emergency visit, a we'll square it later treatment, the friend of a friend who couldn't afford it right now. Over time, it accrued receipts, screenshots of texts, authorizations signed by Lena that never should have been signed, and a trail of free or heavily discounted treatments that added up like a slow drain. I placed the family file on the reception desk and watched their faces shift from smug to curious. Then I started reading. November 3rd, 2018, Margaret. Complimentary follow-up treatments listed as family courtesy, $1,450. I pointed at the line and the date. August 12th, 2019, Carlos. 50% discount applied by Lena without managerial approval, $2,100. December 2019, Margaret again. Full write-off of $3,800 for a procedure marked on house, authorization initialed by Lena. Lena's hand went to her binder like to a life preserver. There were reasons, she stammered. If there were reasons, they should have gone through me or the medical director, I said. You didn't document medical necessity. You documented family favor. I slid a stack of printouts across the desk, scheduling logs with timestamps, recorded notes from staff, and a string of text messages. One log showed an afternoon where Lena double-booked 2 specialty procedures for the same practitioner and then recorded one patient as a no-show rather than pay the cancellation fee, a loss the clinic absorbed. Another showed a pattern of Comp P, or 0.00 entries, where discount codes were entered with Lena's initials in the authorization column. Then the texts. There was the message from Lena to one of our front desk staff. Tell mom we'll take care of it. Put comp code family 2019. There was a separate text from Lena to a vendor. Hold invoice till next month. It's for us. The tone in the texts was casual, like an inside joke that meant nothing to Lena and everything to everyone else. I turned to the ledger where I'd done the arithmetic late at night when I couldn't sleep, and every unpaid bill felt personal. The numbers were blunt. Unauthorized discounts and write-offs. Family designated, $18,750. Scheduling-related lost revenue, double bookings, refunds, $9,420. Complimentary procedures coded as courtesy, $14,200. Total, $42,370. 3-year period. Over $42,000, I said aloud, while I was holding the clinic together. I watched the way the numbers landed, like stones thrown into a family pond, ripples spreading. Margaret's face flushed. That can't be right, she said. You must be exaggerating. You're asking me to run the clinic like it's an ATM, I replied. These are line items. These are invoices and authorization initials. These aren't guesses. I tapped an authorization column where Lena's initials showed up more times than they should have. This is you authorizing discounts, refunds, and free services. This is documentation. Lena tried an excuse I'd heard before. We were embarrassed about money. I didn't want mom to feel bad. It was performative remorse. The kind that sounds like a defense brief. You were embarrassed, I said. So you treated my livelihood as a charity fund. You treated my staff's labor like a favor to a relative, and you expected me to be grateful. Carlos tried to make it about gratitude, but you gave them care. I gave them care because they were my family, I interrupted, voice low. Care is provided because it's medical and because people need it, not because it's a line item you can write off at will. When you turn care into a bargaining chip, you make it a commodity instead of a necessity. You siphon dignity and money. They sputtered. Margaret alternated between anger and pleading. Lena shifted from defensive to belligerent and back like a bad weather system. The staff who happened to be nearby saw the printouts and the texts, and their expressions went from curiosity to something like relief. Not at our argument, but at the clarity. They had felt the cost of these favors. Unpaid overtime, short-staffed afternoons, the awkwardness of asking for payment from the same family that expected the world. You signed things, I said finally, the sentence as precise as a scalpel. You authorized discounts. You made unilateral decisions about patient fees. That's not a family favor. That's theft by kindness. And it's been happening while I was putting every spare dollar back into this clinic. I could see the moment they realized the pattern wasn't just sloppy kindness, but a systematic erosion. Lena's jaw tightened. Carlos kept saying, "We just wanted to help," as if repeating it could cancel the invoice history. It wasn't theatrical. It was arithmetic plus receipts plus the slow, exhausted grind of nights when I chose between paying rent and ordering supplies. That disclosure shifted the power in the room. I wasn't pleading anymore. I was accounting. The ledger doesn't care about apologies. They tried to pivot. Blame the staff, blame policy ambiguity, blame the economy. I had answers. A dated series of emails asking for staff training on discount authorizations. Memos where I had explicitly said no complimentary services without pre-approval. And an email chain where Lena herself had promised she wouldn't process write-offs without consulting me. The silence that followed was thick and final-ish. Not because everyone agreed, but because the facts had been arranged in a way that didn't allow them to keep pretending benevolence was the problem. "I did this because you cared for us," Margaret said finally, voice small, as if she'd noticed the magnitude of what she'd helped herself to. "I cared for you," I said. "But caring doesn't mean consuming. I'm not a free clinic for my family." They left with the family file in their hands and something else. The new knowledge that their generosity had a price tag written in black and white. I sat at my desk and felt a strange, awful calm. The hard work of building a business had a ledger. I had shown them the ledger. The next step would be what to do about it, and that step would require more than spreadsheet justice. This was not the first time my family had tried to rewrite the script of my life. It had been a long-running series, with commercial breaks full of backhanded compliments and reruns of the same edits. Minimize Taylor, amplify Lena. I can still see the framed college acceptance letter in our living room, the one I nearly fainted over, the one I called Mom at midnight about, the one she hung on the wall beside a hand-painted magnet that said, "Family First." At every family event, visitors would glance at that letter and she'd say, loud enough for relatives to hear, "Taylor's doing so well. Isn't that neat?" And then with a small theatrical cough, "But Lena, well, she's got other strengths." That little "but" followed me like a shadow. It meant your success is an interesting hobby. Lena's feelings are the policy. When I got my first professional credential, they threw a party. The cake read, "Congrats, Taylor," in frosting that looked like it had been written by someone whose hands shook when making promises. At dinner, my aunt asked a question about licensing, and Mom answered with a tone that made my years of study sound like a weekend course. "Oh, Taylor, she spent some time on that." Time. That word turned my decade of work into a quaint anecdote, a footnote in the family scrapbook. There were performance reviews in my 20s that I still replay like a broken song. I'd tell them about a contract I'd negotiated or an accreditation I'd won for the clinic, and one of them would tilt their head and ask, was it really that hard, as if complexity were a character flaw? When I presented my research poster at a conference, they clapped because it was polite, then said to a neighbor, "She always was a bookworm," which translated to, "It's nice, cute." It's small things, these micro-dismissals, but they aggregate. They form a weather system that wears you down. Emotional manipulation had a more formal structure. The classic play. Start with praise, escalate to demand, conclude with guilt. After a late shift, I'd get a text saying, "We miss you at Mom's dinner. Are you too busy to be a daughter?" That message wasn't about missing me. It was about being accountable to their expectations. If I didn't attend, I was selfish. If I did attend, they'd crowd me with commentary about how running your own place means you should be grateful for whatever crumbs they offered. There was a time I nearly took a job out of state for a fellowship I'd fought hard to get. I called home to tell them, and my father said, "Flat. Why would you leave? You have a good thing here." When I pushed, because this was about continuing education and growth, my mother's voice shifted to something I'd been trained to obey. Disappointment. "You always run off," she said, the implied accusation ricocheting back to every childhood moment I'd been scolded for trying something new. That disappointment felt like a veto. Lena was the favored script in their heads, the sibling who could do no wrong and whose mistakes were always learning opportunities. She would show up late to family obligations and be excused with, "She's artistic, she needs space," When she flaked on a volunteer shift I organized, my mother called me privately and said, "Maybe you should let her be." The message was clear. I should manage the mess, smooth the ruffled pride, and accept that Lena's chaos was charming. There were more explicit instances, too. Once, at a neighborhood block party, a neighbor, who'd once been a client of mine, congratulated me on opening the clinic. Mom took the opportunity to tell the neighbor in a conspiratorial aside how Lena had been thinking about her own little idea and how supportive we should be. I watched the neighbor's eyes flick between us, and my chest pinged with the knowledge that my achievements were being used as a stage for someone else's audition. The emotional ledger had entries beyond money, subtle erasures, the dismissal of my stress as overreaction, you worry too much, the reframing of my boundaries as ungratefulness, and the weaponization of affection given or withheld on the basis of compliance. If I pushed back, I'd receive a silent treatment, so complete it felt like a social freeze frame. If I acquiesced, the praise was hollow and immediately reallocated to Lena. It taught me an ugly grammar. In their dialect, ambition is threatening and dependency is endearing. I learned to smile while listening to them explain why my plans were reckless and Lena's plans were brave. I learned to internalize that my competence was somehow a competition I had to lose to keep the peace. And yet, because life is never purely tragic, those years taught me something crucial. They taught me to inventory not only the hurts, but the receipts. The times I'd been dismissed, the promises that were never honored, the small patterns that, stacked, became a blueprint for how they would try to enter my clinic. I began to catalog not in anger, but in preparation. Every offhand comment, every minimization became data. That ledger of past slights hardened into a kind of resolve. It wasn't vindictive. It was defensive, which after 3 years of sleep-deprived growth and paying staff wages with my own credit card, felt like intelligence. The narrative I'd been forced into by family scripts didn't fit me anymore. I wanted something else, recognition where it was earned, accountability where it was owed, and the agency to define my worth. So when they tried the binder and the 25% and the will help shtick, I saw it not as a fresh betrayal, but as a chapter in the same book. Knowing the past's patterns made me calmer, and, for the first time, more prepared to write a different ending. After the family file and the management services agreement sat on the reception desk like evidence at a trial, I expected the heat to die down. I should have known family seasoning is eternal. It simmers. The first move was subtle and bureaucratic. My accountant, whom I'd looped in the moment I found the write-offs, forwarded me a voicemail and an email from Carlos. He'd called claiming to be checking in, asked about outstanding invoices, and then, in the same breath, suggested that perhaps the clinic and family could work something out behind closed doors. My accountant hit reply with exactly the kind of professional calm I love. All communication regarding clinic finances must be in writing and CC Taylor. I printed that chain and added it to the family file. They tried a softer approach next. Margaret left flowers at the front desk one Sunday, with a card that said, "For all you do." The receptionist accepted them politely and put them on my desk. The card read like an apology and an agenda at once. It thanked me for keeping family healthy and asked if we could revisit Lena's role soon. I put the flowers in a vase and the card in the file. A bouquet is not a bargaining tool in my clinic. Then came the unannounced visits. They would show up on random afternoons, 2 or 3 people in a clump at the door, bright-faced, as if popping by to borrow a cup of sugar. In reality, they wanted to pop by, to meet staff, to chat about operations, to see the ledger. I trained my team on patient-centered care, not family diplomacy, so the first time this happened, my front desk staff politely reminded them of our visitor policy and offered to schedule an appointment. They refused the appointment and tried to walk back into clinical areas. I called security only once, the moment a relative tried to mount the small staircase into the staff-only area and told a nurse she had every right to check inventory. I didn't enjoy the scene. My hands were cold, and my voice sounded like the person I had sworn I wouldn't become, the one who had to escalate. Security escorted them to the lobby. Calm, firm, paper trail. What changed the tone permanently was process and transparency. I tightened permissions in the EMR. Discount codes and billing adjustments required admin approval and two-factor authentication. I revoked access privileges that had been granted informally. I changed passwords and logged every authorization going forward. I sent an all-staff memo, no complimentary services or write-offs without documented approval. It was short, legal-sounding, and liberating for everyone. I also told my accountant and Colorado healthcare partners to ignore any requests that weren't routed through me or the board. When Carlos tried to call the accountant again, the reply was a polite refusal and a reminder that all financial discussions must be in writing and approved. That's the joy of bureaucracy. It's an unimpeachable ally when you're policing people you love. They tried softer manipulations too, appeals to nostalgia, to how you used to be, to the idea that family is supposed to be exempt from the rules of business. I answered in plain terms, this clinic is my career. It's also a licensed healthcare facility with obligations to patients, staff, insurers, and regulators. Family doesn't override that. I also started billing them at standard rates. After the ledger reveal, Margaret called wanting a family discount for a routine treatment. I told her the price and offered to schedule it like any other patient, with an option for a reasonable payment plan through our billing department. She called back upset. I sent the invoice anyway. I made sure it was processed. The act of making them pay, of treating them like any other client, was a boundary and a lesson. It converted vague apologies into concrete responsibility. My staff's response was quietly gratifying. Where there had been tension and awkwardness around the family's presence, there was now relief. People stopped hesitating when a family member requested an exception because they knew the rule and the rule had teeth. The receptionist stopped flipping between compassion and fear when a relative asked for special treatment. Nurses stopped covering for missing shifts caused when a family member had been given preference. Morale improved because fairness is a kind of oxygen in a small team. There were attempts at coercion. A couple of relatives tried to contact vendors and request invoices be altered, which triggered vendor-side pushback, and then a phone call I forwarded to the family file. Lena called staff at home, which was the most gutting thing, the attempt to go around me and appeal to their empathy. I responded by instituting a staff-only line and a policy that all staffing decisions go through HR. Any unauthorized contact would be logged. I didn't want my team caught between family drama and a paycheck. Emotionally, it was the slow work of showing up and enforcing. No more emergency edits, no more comp codes without approvals, no more casual authorizations. I practiced scripts so I wouldn't falter when they dialed pity. We can't do that. Please make an appointment or discuss billing with our office. I booked neutral, professional meetings when necessary, and I never negotiated in the lobby. I used the board and the MSO as my leverage. They were the institutional backstop to my personal resolve. That didn't stop the guilt trips. Margaret would text about childhood memories or send throwback photos of us at 7, smiling and carefree, then say, "This is all so painful." I answered twice, once with empathy, I remember that day too, and once with a boundary. This clinic can't be a piggy bank. It's work repeating the same sentence that feels mean because it is firm. Boundaries are boring in delivery and radical in effect. By the end of that period, the family had several choices. They could accept the new normal, appointments, invoices, and the occasional neutral meeting with a manager, or they could remain outside the clinic's operations. I didn't celebrate the distance. I celebrated the clarity. My clinic began running like a place where healthcare and governance mattered more than familial convenience. The staff's respect for the rules replaced their old worry about who would be comped or who would expect special treatment. I still saw them in holiday photos and at neighborhood events, but their presence at the clinic dwindled. That was not coincidence. The rules were plain, consistent, and enforced. The aftershock of calling financial and administrative boundaries into being was that they had to reorganize their sense of entitlement around me. They could show up at a family dinner and talk about my business, but they couldn't log into my EMR, call my accountant, or authorize discounts. The distinction is small on paper and enormous in practice. Everything I did after the ambush was less about punishment and more about survival. protecting staff paychecks, safeguarding patient care, and teaching my family that love does not translate to license. The next time they tried to pull levers, they would find the levers welded down. I had weaponized process, and for the first time, that felt like peace. Scheduled the meeting where important things go to die. A neutral conference room at the public library, fluorescent lights and laminate table, chairs bolted to the floor. It was intentionally antiseptic. No living room theatrics, no tablecloths, no chance to turn a conversation into an ambush. I wanted witnesses, so I invited 3 people who would keep the air honest. My MSO rep, Jordan, our accountant, Priya, and 1 board member, Ethan. I also told Margaret, Carlos, and Lena to bring anything they wanted to present. They brought nothing but bravado and a new set of denials. I put a folder in front of each of them. Inside, a timeline printout, copies of the family file receipts, the management services agreement, emails and texts showing their attempts to contact vendors and my accountant, a log of unauthorized EMR access attempts, and a redacted copy of the $42,370 ledger summary. I'd highlighted the most incriminating lines in yellow like a forensic highlighter. Discount codes entered without authorization, refunds issued with only Lena's initials, and messages where Lena explicitly requested comp codes. I wasn't trying to shame. I was trying to render the truth in a format their pride could not verbally evade. Carlos started like he always does. Loud, theatrical, trying to rearrange the facts by volume. This is family. We're trying to help. Jordan, who had the weary patience of someone who negotiates with blame on the daily, interrupted. Help is welcome when it's transparent, she said. But what you're describing, unilateral adjustments to billing and attempts to exert operational control, are liabilities. The board and the MSO will not tolerate it. Priya slid a printed email across the table. It was from Carlos to her. Subject line, quick question about invoices. Can we divert to my account? The text was breezy, as if asking to reroute invoices were the most domestic of errands. Priya had replied politely, instructing that no such change could be made without the owner's written consent. Carlos had later called and left a voicemail in which he attempted to frame the request as routine oversight. I had played that voicemail in the lobby like a court exhibit so staff would hear it. There's a distinct, awful entitlement to telling someone else how to run their business. Lena tried the sorrow card. We were just trying to take care of Mom and Dad. We didn't know how serious this would be. You knew enough to text discount codes, I said. You knew enough to call vendors. You knew enough to ask for invoices to be diverted. Those are not accidents. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The document spoke with a louder, cleaner voice. I slid the final item across the table, a 1-page document I'd been drafting for weeks with Jordan's approval. It was not a legal ultimatum. Lawyers would handle anything binding, but it was a contract of intent and terms I would accept if they wanted any future relationship with the clinic. The terms were simple and immovable. No family members may request access to operational systems, EMR, billing, vendor accounts, without prior board approval. Any historical, unauthorized adjustments totaling $42,370 would be acknowledged. The family could choose a repayment plan no shorter than 36 months or sign a waiver relinquishing any future claims and accept a formal apology in writing. Any future contact with clinic staff regarding operations must be routed through the owner or the board. Unauthorized contact would result in immediate restriction of clinic access. Any attempt to assert ownership or management control in filings or conversations with third parties would be met with legal action from the board and the MSO. When I finished, I tapped a line where the agreement said, "If these terms are not accepted, the board will institute a no-contact policy between the clinic's operations and the named family members." I looked at each of them in turn. This was less about vengeance and more about clear consequences. Either reckon, repair, and respect the rules, or accept exclusion. For a beat, no one spoke. Then Margaret began to cry in a way that suggested panic, not grief, a thin, high sound that expected rescue. Carlos started listing excuses. Lena pleaded. I listened, because the final act required hearing them through before I closed the book. Ethan, the board member, leaned forward. Taylor has built this with sweat and borrowed hours. The MSO will back her. This isn't personal policy. This is governance. He looked at them with the sort of bland authority that makes entitlements look very small. You can sign this, set up a repayment schedule with Priya, and cease all operational contact. Or you can refuse, and we'll implement access restrictions immediately. Carlos looked like someone who'd been offered two highways, one paved with accountability, the other a mud road into estrangement. He tried one last gambit, claiming ignorance, but the texts and emails in the folder contradicted him, and the voicemail matched the emails. Lena cried, but there's a difference between real contrition and the theatrics that had been her fallback for years. They signed the attendance sheet at the bottom of the printed agenda out of civility, not the agreement. I didn't expect instant turnarounds. What I wanted was a documented conversation with clear witnesses and terms. After an hour of tense negotiation, the family agreed, haltingly, resentfully, to the third option, a repayment plan administered through Priya, a no-contact clause for operations, and a formal, written apology from Margaret and Carlos acknowledging the unauthorized discounts and the harm done. Lena, shaking, signed as well. When we walked out of the conference room, the air felt like the last page of a book being turned. The real work was just beginning. Implementing the repayment plan, enforcing no-contact rules, and living alongside the knowledge that blood did not guarantee moral license. There was a smaller, quieter revenge sitting under the conference room table, and it was deliciously simple. The clinic, which they'd always treated like an informal family ATM, was now too corporate for their comfort. The processes I'd put in place, two-factor authentication, board-approved permissions, vendor confirmations, were bureaucratic scaffolding they couldn't climb without boots they didn't own. I'd weaponized the thing they hated most about adulthood, rules. They left with the apology drafted by Margaret afterward, a short note that read more like damaged pride than contrition, and a check for the first installment. It wasn't theater. It was accountability in installments. Lena hugged me awkwardly at the doorway, like someone apologizing with a borrowed coat. I returned the gesture in the smallest way I could. I didn't pull away, but I didn't invite her into the office either. Walking back to my clinic that afternoon, I felt the peculiar calm of a boundary that had been both defined and defended. It wasn't vindictive. It wasn't triumphant in the loud way revenge sometimes pretends to be. It was quiet and firm and boringly effective, a set of lines everyone could read. Margaret and Carlos had been offered a choice. Repair the harm and accept the rules, or live outside the place I'd built. They chose repair, imperfectly and grudgingly. I closed the clinic that night, turned the sign to closed, and sat at the empty reception desk. I thought about the thing I'd learned in the library conference room. Bureaucracy is a kind of armor, and paperwork, yes, even the boring legal stuff, is a form of love when it protects the people who can't be replaced. My staff had a tougher life than mine sometimes. They deserved protection. My patients deserved stability, and I deserved to run the business I'd founded without a revolving door of entitlement. The final line was small, domestic, and utterly satisfying. I locked the drawer where the family file used to live. I had shown them the ledger. I had given them terms. Now the work was maintenance, enforcing the agreements, showing up every day, and letting the consequence of their choices settle into the life they would now have to lead. They could have ownership of the family narrative. They no longer had ownership of the clinic. A year is a long time when you stop letting chaos dictate your calendar. The clinic hums differently now. Mornings start with coffee and quiet competence. Nurses arriving early, front desk already color-coding the day's schedule, the sound of printers instead of passive-aggressive voicemails. Patients come and go without the faint tension that used to hang in the air when my family's names appeared on the appointment list. The staff smile more. There's a rhythm again. Stable, professional, human. Financially, the difference is staggering. The black ink on the ledger used to be a fragile streak. Now it's a solid block. The clinic has expanded into the unit next door, a modest but symbolic step. A second treatment room, a consultation space, a break room with a window and real coffee mugs instead of paper ones. We're booked 2 months out. Insurance companies return my calls faster now that they know I run a tight ship. And I've started mentoring new graduates who remind me of me, overworked, underpaid, and unsure how to ask for what they're worth. I tell them the same thing I wish someone had told me at their age. Competence doesn't make you selfish. Boundaries make you sustainable. They laugh, sometimes nervously, but the message sticks. I make them practice saying no. I make them send mock emails to difficult family clients. We laugh about the fictional scenarios, though mine weren't fictional at all. The family, for their part, stayed mostly true to the agreement. The repayment plan ran on autopilot through my accountant. Small checks arrived monthly, methodical and unsentimental. Margaret once wrote a note on a memo line, for the past, and it almost made me forgive her. Almost. The note went into the archive with everything else. That file is closed but not destroyed. It's a record, not a wound. We don't talk much now. Holidays are transactional. Polite texts, the occasional group photo where everyone poses like witnesses. There's distance, but it's peaceful, like a town after a long storm. Lena moved to another city and posts motivational quotes about growth on social media. I double tap them without irony. She's learning, or at least pretending to, which might be the first step toward actually doing it. Margaret and Carlos have stopped trying to explain or reframe the past. Silence can be a kind of apology when words have lost their value. The revenge, if that's what it was, never came as fire or spectacle. It came as equilibrium. The great quiet irony is that I didn't destroy them. I didn't need to. I just stopped participating in the fiction that they could manage me. And in that void, they had to face themselves without a scapegoat. That's the truest form of payback. Letting people live in the mirror they made. When I drive home after a long day, I pass the stretch of highway where I used to take panicked calls from my mother, the ones where she'd demand guilt trip or cry about the business. Now, the only sound is my playlist and the occasional laughter from staff messages about office antics. The absence of drama feels luxurious. Sometimes, when I lock up at night, I stand in the doorway and let myself remember everything. The ambush, the binder, the spreadsheets, the conference room. Not out of bitterness, but out of gratitude for the version of me who stopped explaining and started enforcing. The clinic lights turn off with a click, and what's left is the hum of the refrigerator and the sense of something earned. Not revenge, not triumph, just ownership of my own peace. A year later, I understand that revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting free.